We've dealt with common rust in the past, and I think early infections that was misdiagnosed into, we just had common rust because we just don't see a lot of southern rust. The key identifier is on southern rust. It's very dense on the leaf, and it's got a bright orange pustule, whereas common rust is kind of like a dark brick red pustule, and it's not near as dense.
This is the Stine Seedcast. I'm your host, David Thompson. Join me as we visit with growers, agronomists, seed experts, and other industry professionals about seed, agronomy, and the business of farming. Hello, welcome to the Stine Seedcast. I'm David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company. I have Brian Hartman. He's our National Corn Product Manager, joining us remotely from just outside St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome to Seedcast, Brian.
Well, thank you, David.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about southern rust in corn. We're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about what we're seeing in the field this year and potential impacts and things that growers need to consider when we're talking about southern rust. So let's get started. Well, so Brian, to get us started, I know you've been on the Seedcast before. You've been with Stine since, if I remember right, like 2006. Is that right?
Correct. Moved July of 2006.
Yeah. So just real quick, tell us a little bit about your background, your involvement with Stine over the years. You've had several different roles with the organization.
Yeah, so I came to Stine in 2006, started as a regional sales agronomist for Stine, covering eastern Missouri and parts of Illinois, southern Illinois. Did that for a short term, then became Eastern Director of Agronomy, did that for a number of years. That eluded into the National Director of Agronomy. Did that for a number of years, and as the company's evolved and we've found more and more of a need, I took on the role of National Corn Product Manager.
In that role, as a National Corn Product Manager, you are kind of the key, I guess, linchpin between research and sales and production, and helping us figure out, what products we bring to market in the Stine bag. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, so I get to work closely with Warren Stine and with Harry Stine, and then also with some outside seed companies.
Okay.
To do genetic selection.
Yep. Well, so today we're here to talk about southern rust. This is a topic that lately has gotten a lot of attention. It's something that's happening in a wide swath around the Corn Belt. So I guess to get us off and running, Brian, maybe if we just give us a quick synopsis of, what is it when we talk about southern rust? What is southern rust?
Well, that's the neat thing about agriculture is that every year is different. Last year, all the hype and all the talk was about tar spot, and once we've got that figured out, Mother Nature throws southern rust to us, and it's not a new disease. I remember back in the late '90s, we were talking about southern rust as it was just getting introduced into North America. We've learned a lot since then, and we haven't experienced a lot of it because we haven't had the environmental conditions for it to really cause economic damage per se. But this year we certainly have. It's a fungal disease. It's blowing in, by southern prevalent winds. And if you look back at this season, we had a lot of storm systems that came up from the south that really brought a lot of moisture and a lot of winds with it. That just blew those spores up to the northern areas, and they took off and running.
So what you're saying is kind of the weather conditions we had this year were kind of ideally suited to seeing southern rust because it would be coming up from the south, and we don't see it every year, but just this year the conditions were just right. And I assume maybe in a lot of areas of the Corn Belt we had maybe wetter than what is typical across a significant portion of the growing season. Does that kind of have something to do with it as well?
Yeah, so a couple key factors with that are obviously warmer temps. We didn't have those cool downs at night, so Our warmer evenings didn't help, and the warmer daytimes temp really let those pathogens spread, and and you need the warmer temps, and you need some leaf wetness for that infection to occur. But once that infection occurs, it doesn't take a whole lot of moisture for that to spread.
Okay. So I guess could you give me a little bit of a just kind of a synopsis of the life cycle of this disease, and how it impacts that crop. In other words, how it grows and develops.
So it doesn't overwinter. So that's the good thing. It doesn't overwinter in the Midwest anyway. So it's got to be brought up through the storm systems, that southern winds. We need that moisture in order to get that infection going.
Well, that's I guess the silver lining here is you're saying that just because you saw it this year doesn't mean you're going to see it next year or the year after that. It does have to come up each and every year, and it has to have the right conditions to be of some impact. So let's talk a little bit about the diagnosis part of this, because again, it kind of seemed to arrive on the scene, and then people were kind of seeing it all over the place. So in terms of diagnosing southern rust, what are the telltale signs? What are they looking for? And what does it look like?
Yeah. So early on, I think we've dealt with common rust in the past, and I think early infections that was misdiagnosed into we just had common rust because we just don't see a lot of southern rust. The key identifier is on southern rust. It's very dense on the leaf, and it's got a bright orange pustule, whereas common rust is kind of like a dark brick red pustule, and it's not near as dense. So that's the key indicator as far as identifying southern rust.
Does that um, does that difference translate into how much it impacts the corn crop, or is it really just a matter of level of infection or level of coverage?
Yeah, so it's all about timing. If southern rust is going to infect your field today, you would have very little economic loss, if any. The issue that we saw this year is that it infected around tassel. So you think about it, southern rust, it reproduces very, very quickly. Every 7 to 10 days, it'll reproduce. So the speed of reproduction is just rapid, and it's faster than any other disease that I'm aware of, or fungus that I'm aware of. For example, tar spots, 14 to 21 days. Gray leaf spots, at least 14 days. So the speed of reproduction is what really catches people off guard, because by the time you identify it, if you wait a week, you've really got some big problems. So it's the speed of reproduction is what really sets it apart, and in how it affects those leaves in such dense matters, it really messes up photosynthesis of those plants.
So, what I noticed around here in the central part of Iowa was it seemed like corn went from green to brown in just a matter of a couple of days. I mean, frankly, it just kind of like that. Is that an indication of the level of severity of or how southern rust impacts the corn at that level?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be instantaneous, but those fields that were affected by southern rust that didn't get an application of fungicide, yeah, they turned quick, and they turned a lot faster. The leaves turn brown a lot faster than what we would normally expect. So it did speed things up
Yeah.
as far as the leaf tissue goes.
You mentioned fungicide, so I guess talking about that, what are the lines of defense for someone who's looking at a situation, and let's say they may have diagnosed that yeah, sure enough, they've got southern rust. I guess tell me about what are the steps they have to take or should be taking once they diagnose it.
Well, the key is weekly scouting and identifying it quickly. That's the main thing. The other thing is not all fungicides are created equal. You're going to want to choose a fungicide with at least two modes of action, and that's what really differentiates us now from what we experienced in the late '90s. Is back in the '90s, the infection came a lot later, and we didn't have the options of fungicides like we do today. And if you think about fungicides, typically your protection on a fungicide, depending on which one you go with. And I don't necessarily have a preference on this platform, but you might get 14 to 21 days protection. And if you think about the speed of reproduction on southern rust, if it comes in at tassel, you have another 60 days to protect that plant until black layer. So it's kind of tricky on timing. It all really depends on when does it infect that plant, and then you got to start making some management decisions on how often do you have to spray.
So tell me a bit about okay, so you have this infection, southern rust has moved in. Obviously, hopefully you're going to take some measures, whether it's fungicide to try to protect that crop. But let's talk about what the impact is. What is it that southern rust is going to actually do to impact that corn crop?
Well, it's the leaves that you need to protect are the ear leaf and above. Those are the leaves that we have to protect because that's where our kernel fill comes from. And that's where that's determining yield on test weight and those type of things. So what it does is it disrupts that photosynthesis, and anytime you lose leaf tissue, you decrease your sunlight absorption, and that can also lead into a number of other secondary diseases that could attack that plant and cause premature death. So typically your planted corn is most at risk because it's going to infect that plant earlier in the life cycle of that hybrid.
Well, you bring up a good point. One of the things we talk about a lot is you can have some disease or pest that impacts that crop, but it may not be the only thing impacting that crop. So that may lead to a secondary infection or a secondary damage from another thing. So there's this multiplier effect that can sometimes take place. In the case of southern rust, is there what does it do in terms of harvestability? So are there issues around like stock quality and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And we're seeing a lot of this and hearing a lot of this. Growers that didn't take it as serious are getting some pretty good surprises. But so think about this: anytime disease overtakes that plant, the natural thing that plant's going to do is it's going to cannibalize its carbohydrates. And where are they going to come from? The stalk, just to compensate for that lost photosynthetic leaf area. So therefore, your stalk integrity is going to give. So the best way to tell if you've got any stalk issues out there is simply doing the pinch test. Down around the base of the plant. If it feels spongy, you might want to take a good hard look at rearranging your harvest schedule and getting those acres harvested sooner rather than later. The other thing we're seeing is, if that disruption in that plant is taking place, while you're out there doing your pinch test, take a couple of ears and break them open, because we're starting to see some cob rot take place as well in those areas that didn't receive any fungicide. So it's just a process. It's the natural cycle of dry down that's interrupted. That moisture in that ear has nowhere to go. So we're seeing some cob rot take place, which is going to cause some ear molds and some things of that nature.
So it sounds like proper scouting is, kind of paramount when it comes to southern rust. And I guess if it comes down to at what point that infection occurred. Like you said, do we think it's going to cause an economic impact, or is it late enough in the year that it's not going to cause major issues? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would agree with that. David. The thing that we are, most growers that you talk to, they're already planning a fungicide application anyway. So, it's the growers that didn't even have one application of fungicide. Those are most at risk, and are probably going to have the biggest surprise come this harvest.
And I think earlier you mentioned when it comes to fungicides, we know there's lots of different kinds on the market. You had mentioned two modes of action. Is that common or is it less common in terms of what a grower, like you said, it's a part of a grower's portfolio, but are they using a dual mode of application typically, or is it a single mode?
It's a single application. There's some generics on the market with single mode, but most of your branded material is going to be, dual mode protection,
Okay.
which would be best.
So, uh, looking at harvest, we talked about the pinch test, making sure you're at least maintaining stock quality, so you're going to have adequate stand at harvest where it won't become a real pain. Are there issues? Well, you mentioned cob rot. What other impact could that have on the harvest of that crop in terms of the corn itself?
Well, there's a number of things. Anytime a disease is present in that field, you're risking yield, right? So we're seeing reduction in yield. We're seeing a reduction in test weight. So think about it. That ear leaf and canopy are responsible for the grain fill, and once that's disrupted, those things are going to be affected. So there's a lot of cases where people are getting in there and they're harvesting and they're a little bit surprised the yield hit that they're taking and the test weight hit that they're taking as well.
Yeah. So, thinking a bit about the fact you said southern rust isn't something we see all that often. I guess looking at that from a research standpoint, is how does that impact breeders' ability to sort of evaluate hybrids for how they do against southern rust?
Well, there's no natural resistant hybrids out there in the market that I'm aware of, but there is some with better tolerance. The benefit to receiving a disease like this is that you get some pretty good notes on it. But as far as doing, hybrid selection and stuff, I think it's important to look at multi-year data just to see if it fits, the situation that we're facing. So we're looking at 2, 3, 4 year data on all of our material anyway, because no 2 years are alike, and we're looking at that material over a broad area. So we're not just looking at per se central Iowa and making selections. We're taking data from Indiana, Illinois, those other areas of the Corn Belt that we're also collecting data from that weren't necessarily hit as hard as per se central Iowa was.
Okay. Um, so you mentioned earlier that southern rust really doesn't overwinter, so it kind of you have to get that um, sort of right combination of factors that cause that to be a problem in any given year. So just because you had it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. What the next year? What lessons do you think growers should be taking? Let's say that, like you said, they've gotten in and they realize that, well, southern rust kind of caused me some problems this year. Maybe took the top end off a little bit. What learnings do you think they should be taking from that, knowing the fact that, again, it's no guarantee they'll see it again, but what should they be thinking about?
Plan for the unexpected, because if it's not southern rust, it's going to be something else. But planning ahead, I look at at when I look at a production plan, I would certainly at least have one application of fungicide budgeted in, and then I would just scout frequently. Every week we've got to be looking at this crop, just to do everything we can to protect it.
Okay. So again, thinking about that harvest season, we talked about impact on harvestability, some impact potentially on grain. Are there considerations that growers need to think about in terms of storage or anything that may be different because of southern rust?
Yeah. So anyway, anytime your test weight's affected, you're dealing with lower test weights. You're looking at a crop that's been stressed due to disease. Um, Definitely make sure that grain is dried to 15, 14 and a half to 15% moisture. And then if you're storing it, I would make sure that you've got a good aeration schedule. Meaning I would run that aeration frequently, and then I would not plan for a long term storage. I would get that moved before next summer. Get it out of those bins, just so you don't risk spoilage.
Sure. So, there have been times where we talked on the seedcast about the fact that sometimes a bad year for disease and pests, or a bad year for growers, is in a weird way, it's kind of a good year for research. So I guess what's the learnings, or what is either the agronomy group, production side, or your team doing in light of this? What are you trying to gather during this time that might help us in future years?
Well, we are taking notes every day. We're taking notes on what hybrids handled it or had a little bit more tolerance to southern rust, as well as other diseases. We do that every year anyway. That's just part of the plan. But one of the things that stood out to me is, we're getting into this pattern of, planning on a fungicide application. It seems like there's, insect outbreaks this year. That if you didn't have insect protection for earworm, there was a good outbreak of earworms that growers were having to spray insecticide for. One of the things that stands out to me is, and it's a benefit to some of our shorter stature hybrid offerings, that we don't talk about enough, is a number of these growers, they have their own sprayers. So they don't have to worry about scheduling a drone or a plane that could take weeks. You take a disease like southern rust, when you have to plan ahead for a drone or a plane, which could take up to 2 weeks. Then you're kind of working around the weather. Every day you're waiting, you're losing yield potential. Where if you have your own ground rig, you can still spray some of our shorter stature hybrids, clear past tassel without any issues.
Give you that added flexibility, like you said, for that second application if you would need it.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so Brian, as you think about, as we're the 2026 season is underway, we're in the middle of harvest, but planting is just a few months away now, as we say in the seed business. What are you excited about for the coming season in 2026?
I tell you, our performance this year is really exceptional. We're having, great results yield wise on corn, soybeans. We've got a lot of excitement within the company, and it's such a fun thing to be part of. In every phone call that I take, there's some level of excitement selling our corn, and that's exciting to be part of. But as we move into next year, I always say plan for the unexpected. One of the things that we're really ramping up is our agronomy services, trying to be that extra hand for those producers, good customers of ours. And, we're going to stay out in front of this stuff as best we can with their help, and, just try to be part of their business.
Well, so as we think about that, are there resources, or where would you advise that growers might go if they have more questions about southern rust, or now that they're in the combine, they're seeing something they didn't realize, where would you advise them to look for additional information?
Well, our good friend Google's got a lot of information out there, but I always start with the local extension. Iowa State does a great job. University of Illinois does a great job. Purdue does a great job. they all have information on southern rust. And the one key thing that you see, because it is widespread, we saw southern rust clear up into South Dakota and Minnesota. I'm pretty sure they've never seen it before, but there's enough communication going on in between the two, all the different universities, that they're pretty well versed on it. One thing that does come to mind as we talk about this and talking about fungicide and spraying is, there's varying opinions on drone, plane versus ground rigs, which is better. And when you think about a fungicide, typically they don't move within the plant a whole lot. So it all comes down to coverage, and, more volume, the better penetrate down to that ear leaf, the better off you're going to be.
Good. Well, Brian, I appreciate you coming on today, talking to us about southern rust. Again, it's been a big topic this fall. Apparently a long time coming, but it's here. So, unfortunately, but thank you for kind of talking to us about what it is and what it means and what growers can do to kind of deal with this issue and thinking ahead for future years. So appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks, David. And, they always say history repeats itself. So, we should be having this conversation in another 26 years.
All right. We'll book it.
In regards to southern rust.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
All right. Thanks so much.